Nolan's Dunkirk is regarded as a survival film rather than a war film, or perhaps a suspense thriller as cited by Nolan, depicting the evacuation of soldiers from Dunkirk beach across the English Channel during the Second World War. The film is shown using a synchronous timeline, alluding to Nolan's other works, most notably in Inception, Memento, and Interstellar, showing the story across 3 different locations within 3 different time spans. The Mole, which takes place over a week. The Sea, over the course of a day.
What are you doing? You know where we're going.
Into war, George.
I'll be useful, sir.
One of ours.
In the air, over 1 hour.
He's on me.
I'm on him.
The 3 stories overlap at given moments, and eventually converge as Collins, Tommy, and Alex are rescued by the civilian boats. Within a conventional war film, the antagonists of the narrative are often identified as the enemy. However, in Dunkirk, the antagonists are not necessarily the Germans. Rather, the antithesis is a concept and perception of time. The structural choice allows for the different subjective perceptions of the passage of time to be reflected within the technical aspect of the film. Rarely do the characters refer to the Germans blatantly, instead simply calling them the enemy.
Every hour the enemy pushes closer.
Rather, the opposing force is something truly inevitable and uncontrollable: time. It stresses upon how Dunkirk does not aim to delve into the personal connections and emotional affiliations of the characters. There's no backstory. It's less about how the characters develop and how you personally relate to them, and more about one singular, reciprocal goal they attempt to attain: their desperation and panic in this moment to get home.
Take me home.
It is ultimately a race against time, and time itself becomes a thematic idea throughout Dunkirk. We hear Colonel Winnan talk about the tides turning and the bodies coming back. We see Collins and Farrier discuss the fuel content and write down times with chalk on the Spitfire dashboards. We feel Alex's frustration as the boat is barely submerged in water, where he asks, how long? Yet time in this case seems to be so difficult to measure, so unpredictable, that it's noted as silence answers this. The film begins mid-action, and without warning, the staggering, blaring sounds of guns are almost instantly introduced. We see 6 soldiers fleeing, only one managing to escape. This is Tommy. The editing takes us through a non-chronological narrative, which allows for editing cues to act as narrative arcs. Not long into the film, we see the shivering soldier, who's played by Cillian Murphy. His motive at this point is simply to survive, and is adamant about steering the Moonstone away from Dunkirk.
Turn it around!
As we cut away from his conversation with Mr. Dawson, we resume to the story that began at the Mole, where Tommy and Alex are frantically grabbing onto the boats after being torpedoed. The soldier who speaks to them is the shivering soldier himself, who at this point is calm and directs Tommy and Alex towards the shore. This editing cue isn't only used to intercut action between the 3 stories, rather almost acts as a flashback sequence in this case, where we catch a glimpse of the shivering soldier before the U-boat attack. As cited in the screenplay, it is the shivering soldier, not yet shivering, in full control of his faculties. The juxtaposition of Murphy post and pre-shell shock also act as checkpoints to distinguish the sequence of events from one another.
If we go there, we'll die.
At many times, Hans Zimmer's score seems to utilize instruments as military weapons, in echoing the ambience of war zone. In the score, Home, we hear a soaring medley of strings, which gradually go from quiet to louder, as if an aircraft approaches. The consistent ticking noise we hear in the background of the film originated from Christopher Nolan's own watch, and is also mirrored within the beats of the strings, as Tommy and Gibson carry a wounded soldier to the Mole. We hear fast strokes, exemplifying the race against time. The soundtrack as the ship is filling up with the seawater is also glitchy and jittery. We hear the heavy use of the shepherd tone, a musical phenomenon in which sound has a consistent ascension, but eventually gets nowhere. and Nolan based the structure of Dunkirk on similar mathematical principles, adapting it into the structure of the narrative. We see small sections of each story as we jump from one to another. We perceive things happening, but before we see the climax, we cut to another story. The tension builds up again, structure repeating over and over until the three stories eventually converge. The soundtrack also mirrors the perspective of the soldiers. As the water sweeps over, filling the cabin, the score, accompanying the evocative and thrilling visuals, creates the illusion of being in and out of water. The camera dips beyond the surface, just as the swift, shifting, staggering sound design we hear is as if the water laps frantically against the soldiers' ears, transitioning between the muffled, underwater acoustics and the blaring chaos of the sinking ship. The editing is also critical in establishing a sense of confusion, or in this case, being misled, adding more to the intensity of the film. As Collins opts to ditch in the channel and lands the plane on the surface of the sea, we presume his seemingly steady state, indicated by his hand wave and followed by Farrier's expression. However, as we resume later to relive the same moment in the perspective of Collins, it's revealed that he's ultimately trapped, struggling to free himself from the Spitfire. Once Collins lands into the sea, he's no longer part of the 1 hour sequence. He enters a narrative taking place over a day at sea, struggling to escape before he's pulled onto deck by Peter. And this is rather effective regarding the sequence of events we see it in. Firstly, we see Commander Bolton on the mole, who says aloud, "This is it," indicating this is the end. And it is to the end for Tommy, Alex, and Gibson, as them and the other Highlanders run out of time, sinking as the boat fills up with water from the bullet holes. Simultaneously, Collins struggles to smash open the hood of the Spitfire with his gun. He is also short of sufficient time. At this moment, all three storylines converge.
You can practically see it from here.
What?
Home.
As the film comes to a close and the soldiers are rescued, the film eventually settles down and the ticking noise in the background stops. It's abrupt. The notion of time in this given moment seems to be no longer a threat, but only for now. As Tommy recites Churchill's "We shall fight on the beaches" speech, we see the accompanying images which depict later and earlier events of the characters we previously saw, respectively. Peter and Mr. Dawson looking at a photo of George in the newspaper, and Farrier setting fire to his plane with his flare gun before waiting to be taken prisoner by German soldiers. The ending of the film is much like the beginning, abrupt, sudden, concluding on a single shot of Tommy as he glances up after reading the speech. Originally, the screenplay had stated for the film to end on a shot of the burning plane, but Nolan has cited this as an apocalyptic image, kind of things to come. The film, in this case, disregards the future of the war. It also disregards the past with its lack of character development and backstory. Instead, we're brought back to this small moment with this young soldier we see at the beginning, as he processes Churchill's grandiose speech. By ending on this personal, still shot of Tommy, we're reminded of this particular point in time. It encapsulates what Christopher Nolan aimed to do throughout Dunkirk, to show a recollection of one given moment.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall never surrender.